Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Heather Gatney and I am the coordinator of the CVFS webinar series. Our host today is Dirga Gamiri, research professor at the Population Studies Center at U of M. Using detailed data from Nepal, Dirga is going to present a study examining how a father's migration abroad influences the school choice and achievement of their children. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation. We ask that you remain muted until then. During the Q&A, you may unmute and ask your question, or you can submit a question at any time today using the chat feature. We'd also like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this point. A recording of this webinar and the slides will soon be available on the CVFS website. And now, before Dirga gets started, we'd like to take a moment here to have Bill tell you a little bit about a new workshop program that we are offering in June. So go ahead.
Thanks, Heather. Just a quick comment, everybody who's with us now and watching the recording later. We are offering this year a week-long workshop on international population research. It's actually designed in one-day units, each one of which is only a couple hours long. And it runs the week of June 6th. There'll be a unit on international population research in general that I'll lead, a unit on community context that Dirga will lead, a unit on child health that Emily will lead, a unit on genetic research internationally that Coulter will lead, and a unit on mental health research that I'll lead, or maybe Sabrina Hermosillo will help me out with. And that thing is available for a fee to anybody who's interested, but we currently have a whole bunch of free opportunities to sign up for that. Please encourage folks you know who are interested in international population research. We're mentioning it at this webinar because it will use the CVFS as an illustrative example in each of the different segments of the course or the workshop. Look forward to meeting folks interested in international population research at that time. Heather, anything I should have added that I didn't?
No, that was great. So in the chat now, you should see a link to our website. Okay, awesome. If you click on that, there's a link to a really short application form in order to apply for funding. Take you maybe 2 minutes to fill that out. And yes, please feel free to send a link to our website or an email. I sent out an email last week as well. If you had that, feel free to forward it to whoever you like. That would be awesome.
Thanks, Heather. I think with that, we'll turn it over to you, Dirga.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, let me first share the screen and then we can move from there. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Can you just make it a slideshow?
Yep, I'm going to do that. Okay, today I am going to share, this is a work in progress with my collaborator in Nepal, Dr. Uttam Sharma. And as it is a work in progress, we would very much appreciate your comment and feedback on this. As you see in the title, we are interested on how does fathers' migration status influence the school choices and achievement of their children. We are primarily motivated for two reasons. Number one is in many low income countries had achieved great success in access to school. So similar to other countries, other low-income countries, Nepal has made a tremendous progress on access to school. You can see those in this graph that this net enrollment rate, that is the rate of kids going to school, of their school age kids going to school. For the first line is for a primary education, 1 to 5. Second one is lower secondary, and third line is for the secondary level. So for a primary level, it is almost 97, 98% enrollment, which is not that high for in in 90s or in early 80s. But even though Nepal has made a great success in access to school, it has fallen behind on learning, which UNESCO calls a learning crisis. And this issue is relevant to many other low income and low and middle income countries. Yeah, as you see, 30% of grade 3 students who speaks Nepali, the national language, at home, received a score of 0 on oral reading fluency of Nepali. It is that serious. In a national assessment of student achievement of 2018, 32% and 22% of grade 5 students respectively performed at below basic level in mathematics and Nepali. Likewise, over 1/5 of grade 9 students from largely nationally representative sample failed to correctly answer what is 6 divided by 3. This turned out to is a serious problem in schooling. Likewise, these kids, the large proportion of these kids or children, particularly from in low and middle income and high migrant sending countries, are exposed to some period of parental out migration, particularly father's migration during their childhood. So we thought that might be one reason, or there might be a connection between the low learning, low achievement and parental migration. Father's migration can be both beneficial, economically beneficial, and or socio-emotionally or developmentally taxing on children. However, despite growing literature, how children may benefit or suffer from father's out migration is not well understood. This is why this made us motivated to take a look at this issue. Building on this literature, we expect that the influence of father's migration may simultaneously operate through two competing mechanisms. As I said earlier, the economic benefit part through remittance and socio-emotional cost through household labor demand, reduced supervision and interaction and support. So a general consensus or expectation about migration and left behind family members' well-being is this additional disposable income from remittance is likely to be devoted to children's education. So they, people expect that. However, educating the association between fathers' international migration and children's enrollment in private school is methodologically challenging and puts heavy demand on specific data requirements necessary for convincing estimation of the effect of migration, given that migration is highly selective. To address this issue, this study takes an advantage of newly available data resource from Western Chitwan Valley to examine this association. I'm not showing you this map to show you the Chitwan, but what I would like to draw your attention is the distribution of schools within Western Chitwan, both the private and public. I might have used the word institutional instead of private, so please do not be confused. Institutional and private are the same, and community are the government or public schools. So in this map, you can see that both the public as well as private school are fairly distributed throughout the valley. Likewise, the Western Chitwan Valley provides an ideal setting to answer this high priority research question in multiple ways. The first one is, if you look at the number of public and private schools, the private schools are growing rapidly. And on the right-hand side, you can see the number of students, boys and girls, going to both public and private. And around 2015, this student in the number student in public school are declining, whereas student in private schools are increasing rapidly. And if you can see, there are more boys than girls in private school. And then in respect to migration, Nepal is currently experiencing massive out-migration. Nepal is one of the old top 5 remittance receiving country, contributing to greater than 25% of Nepal's GDP. At the household level, 56% of family in Nepal receive remittance, which is an average makeup of 31% of their household income. Likewise, in Chitwan, most people are interested in CVFS data. I use the CVFS data here to show the percent of international migration, percent of total population international migrants. Here you see a big climb in 2008. That is because of change in our data collection protocol. In 2008, we made a decision that not only we want to count the people who are living in the household, but also the family members who are currently away. So there is a big jump there. Otherwise, from 2009, you see a continuous increase in international migration until 2016, and then there is a slow decline. Primarily in 2019 and 20, that is because of the pandemic. So the data we use is for a grade 8 student in Western Chitwan Valley of Nepal. We have data for more than 4,000 students from 114 schools, of which 57 are public and another 57 are private. 2 rounds of standardized assessment in math, science, and Nepali were conducted for all grade 8 students, along with basic level examination. Basic level examination, the first standardized assessment was prepared in collaboration with the Education Review Office, Nepal government. And the basic level examination is the examination that government of Nepal or the local municipality conduct that examination at the end of grade 8. So there are 2 types of examination we are looking at. One is the standardized assessment that we conducted, and that it has both a pre at the beginning of the school year and end of the school year. But the basic level examination was conducted only at the end of the school year. We have detailed student, parent, teacher, and school survey data. Our measures include school enrollment. Private school enrollment is coded as 1. Student assessment score is coded as % correct. How many, what percent correct answer they gave in the assessment. And basic level examination, that was scored in a full mark of 100. So these are 3 outcome variable. Our explanatory factor is father international migration and remittance. And in each of these, in each of our models, we control for age and gender of child, school preschooling and graded repeat, child engagement in household chore, ethnicity, mother's and father's education, father's age, parent engagement in children schooling, household size, household wealth index. We had an extensive set of those controls. These are the descriptive statistics. I am not going to go in the detail, but in general, if you see 53% are enrolled in a private and 47 are enrolled in public schools, and about 31% of those has a father international migrant, and child is a female, 48%, and rest of it you can look at later when you have extra time. First thing we look at is there a difference between the public and a private school? As I know, people perceived like private schools are better than public schools. Indeed, our assessment, both our own assessment and the basic level exam that is conducted by the government themselves, all of these tests shows that private schools are doing better than public schools, and those differences are statistically significant. These are just a mean on those scores. It doesn't matter whether it's a baseline or end line or basic level exam at the end of a school year. Every time we do some we give some test, that students at private school are doing better than in a public school. As I said, the migration is not random, and it puts a lot of challenges and to estimate, properly adjudicate the effects of migration on any outcomes. And scholars have used some multiple strategies, like instrumental variables. Some scholars use instrumental variables. Some scholars have used fixed method, and some use propensity score. So here we are using propensity score approach. What we did is we estimated the individual propensity model with a theoretically guided covariate. That means there is a huge literature on the determinants of international migration. So we use those covariates to estimate these models and categorize the propensity score into 4 quartiles: 25%, 50%, 75%, and coded them as 4 domains. And similar to migration, enrollment is in private school also very selective. So that also poses a similar issue about, and then you have already seen that in this baseline, even the baseline score. Those kids who are going to private school, they already did better, even in the baseline. So that puts that poses a huge threat on our estimates. So what we did is we used a similar approach of propensity score. We calculate the individual propensity of enrolling in private school, and then categorize them into, I think, 5 categories for the school enrollment part. Okay, this is our first set of results. I have not put all the complete model here because for the presentation purpose, I know it's going to be too crowded. So here you can see that father is an international migrant in the last 12 months, and these are the odds ratio. So it increases the odds of enrolling in the private school by almost 30%, 31%. And this model controls all the individual and household level, covariates that I mentioned earlier. The second part, we added remittance, and as you see, the receive less than 100,000 rupees as a remittance has a negative effect. So what that means is, compared to those who do not migrate, whose father is not an international migrant, or do not receive any remittance, those who are a migrant and send less than 100,000 rupees has a negative or reduce odds of enrollment in the private school. What that means is, if they are not rich enough, or they do not have a threshold of remittance, like and then the next category, 100 to 200,000, and 300 to 400,000, and 400,000 to 500,000 is not statistically significant. But you only get it significant positive effects once the father is going to send, or the household is receiving more than 500,000 rupees as a remittance. So remittance works in a way that it has some threshold, like a 500,000, and then only it has a positive effect. But otherwise, remittance does not increases the chances of enrollment in private schools. However, the father international migration status is still independently, positively significant, which is a very interesting part. If it is not through economic advantage, what that is some new research question. Then in the model 3, what we did is we interact the father international migration with child gender, and it looks, as you see, this odd ratio is significant, statistically significant, and what this means is that even though father's international migration was positive for total, but for girls, it has a negative effect. It negatively affects for the girls. And then we have, final model, including everything, and those effects remain very similar, very similar. This model, we control for the propensity score for migration, and other individual, community, and household level controls. So this suggests that father's international migration has positive effects on enrollment in private school. Let's go next to the achievement. This is these are the estimates from a multi-level regression for gains in assessment score over time. By over time, we mean between pre and post. By pre, I mean at the beginning of the school year, and post, I mean at the end of the school year. So the difference, how much they gain during the year. When we looked at how much gain there is not much. About, on an average, student gain very little, which is about 5%. Some of them had a negative gain, even a negative gain. Some of them have positive gain, and some of them have zero, nothing. No, they don't gain anything. because we use the same, assessment in time 1 and pre and post. Some people thought that student might remember what they got in the pre-test might influence in the post-test score. So what we did is we created 4 different modules of those assessment, equivalent assessment, and then and they were not assigned the pre-test form to the post-test. So here what we saw is child is enrolled in a private school has significant effect on mathematics gain score, but not in science and Nepali. And father is an international migrant, has no effect in any of those subjects. So this is a gain score, which is so because of the gain itself is not that large. We don't know. I mean, there may not be much to explain here. The next slide is about now I use only the post or this is a from BLE exam, basically level exam that was administered by the government. And we got those scores from them. So here the story is child enrolled in private schools are doing much better in each of those subjects, Nepali, math, and science. But the father's international migration status has no effect whatsoever. So I don't know how to explain this. It could be like, father's international migration status effects might be working through enrollment in private schools. So discussion and conclusion. First thing, I will find a strong positive statistically significant association between father's international out-migration status and children's enrollment in private schools. This effect is stronger for boys than girls. Second, find a strong positive statistically significant association between the amount of remittance received by a household and children enrollment in private school. But we did not find any significant statistically significant effect. We failed to find statistically significant effects of father's international migration on children's enrollment in private school. These this is work in progress. These analysis raise more questions than they answer. So we are exploring more on what might be the other mechanism at play that are influencing the student achievement or learning. One possibility could be labor demand at home because of absence of father. Second possibility could be that there is a reduced supervision by the father. And third could be, any support like, father could support to the kid in their homework or in their school activity. Those could be some of the possible alternatives explanation. And we want to continue exploring those. I will stop here. And if you would like to know more about it, please visit those 2 websites. One is ISCRN website. We have all those instruments and code books saved there. And UK Data Bank website that has data too.
Thank you, Durga. you opened this presentation calling this a work in progress. Is that correct?
Yep.
Awesome. So before you go backwards through, before you go this direction through the slides, can we go back to your tables? I find myself with a lot of questions about what the comparison groups are. I'm confused. And so interesting, right? I mean, I am confident I don't understand propensity score analysis to know, to make sure I understand the difference between, yeah, stop right here. Thank you. The difference between putting the father's international migrant in the model and putting the propensity score that father will become an international migrant in the model. But, you know, sort of as I look at those four models, I find myself having questions about each one of those models, wondering what happens when you blank. And so, you know, in model one, you said you got the propensity score controlled. What happens if you don't have propensity score controlled? Does it make any difference in that coefficient that I see there? That's kind of a curiosity that I have. And maybe that would be answered by, yeah, well, I'm curious because in some sense, if the propensity score accurately predicted who would and would not be a migrant, and you put whether or not the person was actually a migrant, I mean, maybe one hypothesis is that that's the random portion that's left in this measure, but that seems like one interpretation. It seems like the empirical reality could vary from that. And then I got, you know, sort of as we go through these models, I think I got a what is the comparison group kind of question about each one. So if I understand correctly, in the second model, you add remittances. And is it correct that no one who is not a migrant could have sent a remittance?
That is a little bit, messy in the sense that we have not, we have not make a distinction between, this is all remittance, like they might be receiving remittance from, domestic migrant.
So the father might not be an international migrant and they're still receiving a remittance.
Yep.
I see, because I became really confused about what receiving less than a certain amount, like if they receive 0 remittances, where are they in this model? What is the comparison group for receive less than 100,000 rupees?
No migrant or household that do not have migrants is a comparison group here.
So that seems weird to me to interpret the remittance categories, because that means the remittance categories you have there is the same comparison group as the father is an international migrant.
Yep. The comparison group is same. Yeah.
So it's one comparison group for both variables.
Yep.
That makes me not clear on what the interpretation of the rupee values is. Like if the comparison group for the rupee values was say 0 rupees and then 1 to 100,000, I'd have a better sense of what the rupee value comparison was.
Yeah, I mean, right. The first category, maybe we need to, we include all the migrants expecting that they would send some, and there were few migrants, even if there are few households, even if they have migrants, they have not received remittance.
And maybe I didn't look at the descriptive statistics long enough, but I mean, maybe this means that one of the remittance categories should be the comparison group for remittances, that you could take like, now you're scaring me. The certain things.
Okay.
But maybe I don't know the answer. And interesting, you know, I have a similar question to my question about model 1. If you drop father as an international migrant out of model 2, what happens to those remittance coefficients?
Oh, that one we looked at. Yeah, they were very similar. But yes, yeah, we could comment on that.
Might be useful to show that, just to help people like me get clear that the
Remittance
reference,
only.
how much of what I see here is because the reference category is changing around versus because of the values that you're showing me there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
And then I got a similar, if I understand model 3 correctly, you've shown father is a migrant as a main effect. You've shown father is a migrant times child is female as an interaction effect.
Yeah.
But you're not showing us child is male or female as a main effect. I think that means I can't interpret the direction of the interaction because I don't have female as the
right.
main
I deleted that.
Yeah, I see that it wouldn't have fit. I see
Yeah.
that part.
Yeah.
Yeah, but hard to fit there. But I think it means I can't quite interpret that.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a super interesting thing. And could I ask one last question about the dependent variable? So it's enrolled in private school. Is it enrolled in private school in a specific calendar year?
Yep.
Which is?
2077 to 2078.
And if you take that academic year, 77 to 78, is there any switching from public to private in that year? Like, are there people who drop out or enter in or stuff like that? I never knew that out of the data.
Yes, I mean, yeah, that part, not much in general, because from this study we cannot estimate. And the only thing we know is those who appear in the baseline did not appear in end line, and we have a missing for each of the subject, but not that many. For that, we are going to explore our CVFS data, because then we have this, monthly record of where this kid goes to.
Yeah, because I think it's totally an interesting question, and and Emily, I know you're here. You and Nell Compernall have this super interesting paper on husband migration timing relative to before the baby's born, after the baby's born, and my interpretation of some of that is that they're already making decisions before the baby's born, or before the kid is school age, about whether to raise money to pay for private school. And so I'm sort of curious, about sort of before the kid is even school age, what was the migration history? After the kid is school age, do any of the dads go then, and do you see the kids switching from public to private? That kind of stuff. Totally curious. And then last set of questions I'll ask, and then I promise I'll shut up, is can you go to the change score models? Because I love those.
Oh, these are the change score models.
Yeah. Well, no.
Oh, no. Sorry.
Next one. Yeah, next one.
Next one. This one.
Yeah, super interesting.
I mean, we have worked on this so hard. Yeah, go ahead. I'll tell you.
I figured you must have. Yeah, and that I've been working with this also, and of course, one very exciting thing to me is that within private schools, whether or not they have a bathroom that provides girls with sanitary supplies for menstruation and soap has a big independent effect on these end line scores relative to the baseline scores, and I like the change approach. Yeah, it keeps making me wonder about when the dad's migration occurred and whether that could help you sort out why you're not seeing an effect here. Is it the case that that the migration all occurred before the baseline, and therefore in this change score you're not seeing any effect of it? Would it be, if you looked at just migration that occurred during the year, would there be a negative effect of the father being away? If you looked at remittance that occurred just during that year, would you see an improvement in scores? I mean, just, curiosity about these change models and what you might learn from them. I mean, it's sort of reassuring, given that in my work I only looked at private schools, that that whether it's a private or public school has no effect on science in Nepali. The other interesting thing that we found looking at private schools is that whether or not it has a library has an independent, whether the school has a library has an independent effect also, which might be interesting. But yeah, tons of questions here about the timing of the migration experience relative to the period of change we're examining, and how much of that, because in our models of these change scores, every other social demographic difference that predicts educational achievement in Nepal goes away when you control for the baseline scores. They just all get washed out. So in some sense, it's definitely stacked to get minimum prediction of change.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, even in this morning, you were dealing with the same problem. Like, you saw this, these effects, and once you put the baseline, and everything washed away, and basically, and there is so much selection going on in terms of private public. It has been really difficult to nail it down. Like
one of the reasons that I shifted to private only is because there are more of them by the period we're looking at, and the selection into those two is tremendous. But
this morning we decided we want to try the school level fixed effect model to see, so that we are comparing within the school only, not between the school.
And seeing that kind of washout of the difference in difference approach is what made me curious about the consequences of the of the propensity score approach. And if you're including the propensity score in the model, how much gets washed out because of that, compared to the difference in difference, compared to a fixed effect of schools, et cetera, and the fact that we could take multiple different effects. All right, I promise I'd shut up, so I'm going to mute myself to try and help make that happen.
Deirdre, I had to jump off. I apologize because I got a phone call I had to take. So I apologize if Bill asked this, but one of a question I had related to him is, so you showed in the models predicting private school attendance, an interaction term, I think it was between father's migration and being a girl. And I'm curious if you tested interactions between the remittances and being a girl. So is there a difference in the amount that fathers are remitting if it's a girl, and then does that in turn affect?
You were correct. We have not done that. There is a paper that shows that, like, the remittance goes to boys, not to the girls. Yes, we should do that. Yeah, thank you for reminding that.
And then I think Bill was asking this right when I had to jump off, but what was the main effect of being a girl? Was it significant? Were there differences by children's sex?
On school achievement?
On the attendance, yeah.
Achievement, like, again, girls are more, girls has gained more, has a significant effects on BLE, all three subjects. So yeah, but again, the issue is,
well, that one has no change in change.
No
so that's crap. Sorry for going there, but sorry. And Emily, I think if you meant enrollment, I think actually the descriptive graph he showed of that was pretty
compelling, right?
Well, I guess you couldn't tell statistical significance of the differences. All you could really make out of that is the slopes, I guess.
Right, so and those are bivariate. So I just wonder, once you control for some of the other characteristics, if maybe that might wash out.
Right. So Deirdre, back to that private school enrollment models that you did. I hear Emily, like, I understand you wanted to show the interaction. I'd like to see the affected gender first, actually, and then add the interaction and keep the affected gender and see both, because Emily's point is well taken. Like, this, the affective gender influence, our girls getting into private schools from their parents as often as boys, sort of.
And it just helps in, contextualize that interaction term. But I'm really curious about
Absolutely.
the interaction between remittances and child sex. So I think that'll be important to test. But I also share Bill's cautions about the how are you handling, the is a migrant but not receiving any remittances category and who your comparison is.
Yeah, I adapted those categories from a previous paper, but I think in this case, we need to think more carefully here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a challenging question, I think. So I don't think that there's necessarily a straightforward way to handle it. But yeah, I definitely would encourage you and Uttam to think a bit more about that. And I'll be curious to hear what you find with the remittances by child sex.
Sure, thank you.
Hey, Deirdre, nice work. I have a couple. A main question is more the sort of conceptualization of father is an international migrant. So right now it's just a dichotomy, but that's a bit too crude. And one thing it sort of collapses upon or ignores sort of like the previous history. So in some of our work with Jen and some work I've done with Victor Agajanian, we've broken it down instead of just two categories, the big theoretical step of doing three. And that would be never a migrant, currently a migrant, and not currently a migrant, but has ever been. And you would expect that not currently, but has ever been. Maybe that's because they built up resources. So they're going to appear more similar in their effects to the current migrants. So if you have any sort of history, it might be interesting or theoretically richer to break it down in three categories. And if you have a lot of migration history, then you can do all sorts of things like number of years since a child first enrolled, years accumulated before enrollment, before the child's birth. So to sort of get sort of this historical process in which fathers build up resources and then they come home and then they expend them or things like that. So I just wonder if the data makes that possible.
I thought it was pretty smart of you, Scott, to start with the massive theoretical leap of current compared to previous, because when you said history, my head where I assume Deirdre's also went was, yes, he has how many person years of this, that, and the other thing, and he knows which ones, and worse yet, he knows where they were. So he could do person years in India and person years in Europe and person years, it very quickly escalates to there's so much data richness that it's sort of prevents you from making a choice. I think the idea of even looking at previous versus current, Deirdre, gets back to the work that Emily and Nell did that sort of shows some of these husbands are migrating before kids start being born. Yeah. Scott, which I suspect is very similar kind of resource raising behavior that you're concerned about with previous versus current.
Yeah, so are all these students coming from registry households? Is that why we have all this rich information?
No,
or how did you get all this?
Yeah, I have to admit here, these data are from a cross-sectional study, not we are trying to see how many of these students are also in our CVFS sample. This is a sample, it's not a sample, it is a population of all 8th graders in Western Chitwan. So some of them are from CVFS sample and some of them are not. And in terms of father's migration history, I have to take a look at, because we usually ask this, how many years he has been or he has been away. So that might give me some information, but I am afraid I will have that detailed information for this sample, all sample, yeah. But I could do that for a subset of the sample and see how that changes things, yeah. Thank you. It's very interesting, and we have a paper looking at prior to migration departure, during during destination time period and return. But that is for different different analysis.
If no one has other questions, I have another maybe small clarification. Do private schools have an application process? So I know that's a selective procedure in terms of income and who is able to afford this, but do they also reject kids who actually are performing low? So that could actually sort of structurally be causing these patterns of performance because they just remove the
Yep.
poor performing kids from
I
private
mean,
school.
there is not a formal, but there is a informal way of doing it. In this model, I had a control with repeated grades. If some kids has already repeated grade in grade 8, that has a negative effects on your estimate. So yeah, private schools want to discourage people who have a lower performance in the previous school or previous exam. But another part is they are a business operator, so they want to maximize their profit also. So they want to get as many students as they can who can pay their higher tuition, and that's another part of it. Yeah.
Durga, you mentioned that the kids of the migrants aren't doing as well and in school, and that might be because they have more demands at home with their father away. Is there a way that you could look at that with the data?
Yes, we have that measures too, because we asked them how many hours they spent last week in household activities. So by that, I am thinking that would be a proxy for migrant person, non-migrants. Yeah.
Okay. And no doubt you probably collected absence or days of
Absence in
being
the
absent
school.
from school. We could look at that.
That one, yeah, that one has some issues because three schools destroyed their attendance record because they thought they have a lowest level of student attendance in their school compared to the other schools. They fear that the government or the district education office might take action on them because there was a so low student attendance. We are missing some attendance information, but we did ask about whether they missed any classes last week. Yeah, we asked that to the student themselves and the parents, but not attendance record from the school.
Okay, we're almost out of time. Maybe time for one last question. If not, I don't see anything. Well, thank you, Durga.
Thank you, Durga, and thank you everyone else. Great to
Thank
see
you, everyone.
everybody.
Yeah.